welcome. Oops. Turn off your phones. Welcome to the January 2023 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. And with that, thank you for joining us. And I call this a work session to order, and I will turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Our first topic is the outline of terms for a potential land exchange and overall land, I guess, project with the University of Oregon. We've been in discussions with them for quite a long time. And I think the last time we were in council was in July to just tell you sort of conceptually what the idea was. And we've been negotiating since then with them. And so Denny's going to walk you through what's happened since July and kind of outline the terms for you to consider whether you'd like to proceed.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, City Councilor, Denny Breaux, Planning and Development. As Sarah mentioned, we were here in July and we provided a kind of a general overview of discussions we've been having with the University of Oregon regarding the expansion of their Autzen Stadium complex. And basically it entails a new indoor practice facility and 2 outdoor fields to replace the 2 that are there now. And they expressed some interest in acquiring some city property that's part of Altmaker Park to accommodate that project. And back in July, those discussions were focused on a potential land exchange that the U of O has proposed, along with a whole bunch of other mitigations that we identified early in the project that we really needed to focus on to make this work for both of us. And in July, council provided direction for the city manager to negotiate, and we've done that. And so we are back. And today there is a outline of terms in your packet, which is in the attachment that gives a whole lot of detail. And I'm going to try to summarize them. It's pretty consistent with the conversation we had in July. There's been a lot of moving parts, but generally what we talked about in July with council, what we're proposing today in the outline terms, it's tightened up. It's more detailed, obviously, but it's pretty consistent with our previous conversations. So again, today council is being asked to consider those terms. Not moving on the screen, is it, Byron? Mine looks different.
I have to imagine some slides.
Yeah, if you can imagine, put yourself Autzen Stadium. We can talk about it here. I can start, but just to orient you, there's some things that are in play as part of this. I think it's just good to rehash. There's the existing Machofsky Center indoor practice facilities. There's a couple of practice fields next to the Moe Center that they proposed to build their indoor facility on. We'll talk about the Cuthbert Amphitheater, the Science Center, the city-owned gravel lot that's kind of east of Autzen Stadium near the bridge and the canoe canal. See if it comes up.
We have them here. Then.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's showing up on my screen, but. So I'm on slide number 2, or slide number 3 now. And what you would see is the new indoor practice facility that we're proposing built on those 2 outdoor practice fields that are west of the Machofsky Center. And the 2 new outdoor practice fields really overlap the city property, what we call the Science Center parking lot, but it's a city-owned parking lot. And it would require realignment of Leo Harris Parkway, as well as acquisition of basically that Science Center parking lot. You go to the next slide. There's a red outline area there that you see, and that generally is the property that they are proposing to acquire from the city. And the numbered, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 on the diagram there. Number two is the actual existing Leo Harris Parkway that they have proposed that we vacate. 3 and 4 are the Science Center parking lot. And they, again, if you look on the map there, they're proposing that Leo Harris Parkway gets rerouted on the backside of that Autzen Stadium parking lot, which is basically that red area labeled number 4. There we go. Thank you so much. And then the little parcel labeled number 1 is a little area east of Leo Harris Parkway near MLK. And those 3 properties, 1, 2, and 3 really make up about 4 acres of property that they would acquire from the city. Interestingly, the U of O actually owned this property in the 70s. It was transferred to Lane County in the 80s, and the county transferred it to the city in the 90s. So this has exchanged hands a couple times. Again, I mentioned when we started the project, one of the things that we identified right away is there are going to be some impacts to this project, and that we would need to work with the university to mitigate those. And the major mitigations really are around the loss of parkland, which is that parking lot is part of our parkland, the Holt Baker Park. And of course, they have proposed a land exchange, which I'll talk about here in a second. Vacating the right-of-way is also one of the things they would have to mitigate, and they would propose to replace that with a new street alignment. Parking is a big one, taking away 230 spaces of parking in that area that serves Cuthbert and the Science Center and the park is an important one. So we'll talk about what we are proposing for mitigations to the loss of the parking lot. And then the Science Center is also a big one. The Science Center is a nonprofit venue for the community, and there's been a lot of interest in trying to minimize the impacts of their operations, their revenue, because they get some game day revenue from parking, but also trying to maintain their ability to expand and program and so forth. So we have had conversations with the Science Center. The university has been talking to the Science Center. We know that we will need to make sure they have some room to expand if they want to be there, because they feel like expansion is kind of key to their future success. They also do outdoor programming for kids and camps and those kinds of things. And so as you'll see, some of the parking mitigations that we are proposing take some of the areas that they're using on the north side of the building for classes, et cetera. And we are talking to them about moving that to the south side of the building so that they would have some area. But in any case, we would need to update their lease. We have a lease with them, and we haven't done that yet because we need to perfect these terms and kind of decide what the final design of the parking and all that's going to be. And then we would move to update the Science Center lease to make sure that before closing, they have room to expand and they have their parking needs met and their programming needs met. They're anxious right now because we have not done that amendment yet. And so I think their biggest concerns right now are really around making sure they have room to expand, room to program, and that their parking needs are met and so forth. But that is a condition of closing. We will amend that lease and work with the Science Center before we transfer the property. So the loss of parkland mitigation is really addressed by a property swap. So the university owns property along the riverfront on the downside side of the river. And to mitigate the loss of parking on the other side of the river, they proposed this land exchange, which is about 8 acres. It's adjacent to the riverfront park and the steam plant. It has pretty comparable value when you look at this property versus the property that we would be giving the university across the river. There's more property here at play. It's 8 acres here, 4 acres across the river. It's on the downtown side, of course, so I think that presents some opportunities that are kind of exciting. It's adjacent to the riverfront park and the redevelopment that's happening there in the riverfront. It is included in the U of O's existing conditional use permit, and that conditional use permit has a 200-foot setback, which we would intend to keep in place for this property as well. So that first 200 feet we would be using for or targeting for open space use, just like it is currently. But it's a beautiful piece of property. It has some advantages. It has river access potentially for recreation. We've heard a lot from people that they want to be able to go to the river and get to the river and touch the river. And on this downtown side of the river, there just aren't that many access points. This has some advantages because of the slope. It's kind of a gentle slope. There's some bedrock there that makes it easy to get to the water and so forth. So we see this as an opportunity to enhance the area with some habitat improvements, maybe provide some recreation opportunities. We don't have a definite plan for the property yet, but we intend to manage it as part of our riverfront park plan. And so there's some potential exciting opportunities there. So moving on to the parking mitigations, all of the red areas here are what is being proposed that the university would build as part of their project. I mentioned 230 spaces in the Science Center parking lot, assuming those go away. They have proposed building out parking in these red areas, and I'll talk about each one of them in detail, but in sum, all of these areas would generate potentially over 300 parking spaces to replace the 230 parking spaces. So just diving in a little bit more detail here. This is the area around the Science Center. The Science Center is there to the north. And you can see there's some hashed area kind of to the south of the Science Center. And you could kind of think about that maybe be as an area where we could extend their lease and they could do programming and et cetera there. But you can see there's a parking lot north of the Science Center. There's approximately 52 spaces in that conceptual design. There's some parking to the east there. You can see there's 97 spaces potentially there. There'd be public parking, city-owned parking, but the university would build it out as part of their project, as part of the construction project. These are conceptual, so we're not locked into this exact design. We spent enough time to make sure it works, but I think as part of the conditions of closing, we would want to make sure we have an agreeable final design that works for everyone before we close on the land exchange. This is just a small little drop-off area they're proposing on the new realigned Leo Harris Parkway. There's a few parking spaces there, I think about 7, but it could be used as a drop-off area for game day, for the Science Center, for Cuthbert events, et cetera. This is what, at least conceptually, this is one idea about regarding some enhancements around Cuthbert Amphitheater. We know that the loss of that Science Center parking, which is the closest parking, convenient parking on this side for Cuthbert, we know that we need to mitigate that. Exactly how we do it, we probably need to work a little bit more on this, but this is one concept that the university is prepared to support if this is where we want to go. And it has about 44 ADA parking spaces, a new path, improved path, ADA accessible path to the entrance of Cuthbert. We've talked about having the university help as part of the project move the box office to maybe it's more central or it's to the south. We've also talked about potentially pushing the fence line back, and you can see this configuration has the parking back enough that you could still push the fence line to that parking area if we wanted to get some more space inside Cuthbert. So this is a little bit flexible, but I think they are basically saying we have set aside funds to help mitigate the Cuthbert impacts, and we need to spend a little bit more time deciding what our highest needs are. But this is one concept that we could move forward. And then finally, this is the gravel parking lot. I call it the pothole parking lot if you've ever used it. This actually is a configuration that has 122 spaces, and this is probably about as large as we would probably support here. It could be smaller, but this would be an improvement that would also include a kayak launch. You can see it kind of up there, the top left of the parking lot, where people could actually go. And if you've ever kayaked, which I have, it's quite a task to get the kayak through the mud and over the bank and all of that. So this would be a amenity for the park users to get their kayaks and canoes in the canoe canal. Some of the other project features beyond just kind of the mitigations I've talked about the canoe and kayak launch. They're proposing some improvements to the Otson Bridge right next to the dog park over there. And that would really provide emergency egress, ingress, especially for Cuthbert events. There's only one way out of there currently. So there have been emergencies there where it's hard to get ambulances out, or the acts trying to get to the airport and those kinds of things. So they are proposing to do some improvements so you could actually get better access there for emergency purposes at this point. Historically, all of that parking over by Autzen Stadium, by PK Park and so forth has not been available all the time for Cuthbert events and weekend Alton Baker Park events. But they have agreed to open that up and allow us to use it for events as well. They've also agreed to have the new facilities be used for emergency use. That's in the outline of terms. The Mashofsky Center is currently part of Lane County's emergency plan, but it's not a air safe environment for smoke events, for example. It has really poor ventilation. In fact, I've actually heard the air is worse inside the Mashofsky Center when we have smoke, but they are working with the county to get some grant funds to update the ventilation equipment so that that would be more available for emergency events, especially our fire events. And they also intend to have FEMA certify the new facility for use in emergency, but that wouldn't happen until after it's completed, but that would be their intent. And then finally, the community benefit project that we've identified as a $1 million contribution that we would get at closing of the land transaction is something that the university has put on the table for us to advance a community benefit project somewhere in the Alton Baker Park area in the neighborhood of this project. It's an undetermined project at this point, but they're committed to working with us to find some community benefit project. We've talked about improvements to the canoe canal so people can actually canoe to the river and, you know, a little beach area on the river and things like that. We haven't really focused in on exactly what that would be, but we probably will start doing some Alton Baker Park master plan work before we lock in on how we might use those funds. So again, the outline of terms is included in your packet. The highlights you'll see in there are the land exchange, the project mitigations that the university would commit to doing as part of their project at their cost. We have a bunch of conditions that need to be satisfied before we close. City would have final kind of say and approval of the street design and the parking configuration before we would close on the property. We have a construction phasing plan requirement in the terms, which basically means they need to work with us to make sure there's still access to the park and to Cuthbert and to the Science Center and phase construction. We will want them to build the replacement parking before we remove the Science Center parking, for example. So that would all be included in a phasing plan. Project readiness is an important one. We made it clear that we are doing this for the purpose of them moving forward with this indoor facility and their need to build outdoor facilities. And so closing would really happen. The land swap would happen when they're ready to build the new facility. So we wouldn't transfer the property until they're ready to do that. There's some other things in that we need to make sure we meet. There's Oregon Parks requirements, Lane Water Conservation Fund requirements potentially for this site that we've used those grant funds in the park in the past. There may be some requirements if we remove property that we have to replace it. So we just need to make sure we're in good standing and meet all the requirements for state parks because we need to continue to have access to those grant funds in the future. We'll own all the improvements, the parking, the right-of-way, all of that we would own them. And then of course, there's the $1 million contribution as well. So with that, again, the full outline of the terms is in your packet. And if you have any questions, if you decide to take action today, the direction would be to basically direct the city manager or authorize the city manager to enter into a full agreement. This outline is not the agreement. We still would need to formalize agreement with a little bit more detail in it.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. I see Greg has a question. Anybody else need to be in the queue? Alan and Matt? Okay. Okay. And Jennifer. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Greg and then Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I really don't have many issues with this proposal, but I want to go back a little bit in terms of the usage of the Mashofsky Center. Now, my understanding is when the Mashofsky Center was built, that's what it was built for, was for an indoor practice facility for the football team. And now we're looking at an additional indoor practice facility. And then my understanding from the AIS is the Mashofsky Center is going to be used for other activities or other sports. Do you have any more detail on that, or do they, or are those plans, still under embargo by the university?
My understanding is you're correct, Counselor Evans, that the football program basically monopolizes the use of the Machofsky Center. And so other sports don't necessarily have access to it. So you could think about baseball and softball and soccer and, other sports that could come indoors when in the rainy season and work out and so forth. It is a kind of a multi-use facility from that standpoint. But because football uses it almost all the time, and because it's, at least by the U of O standards, it's an aging facility it doesn't really match the rest of their modern facilities over there, I guess. And so I think their motivation is twofold. One is to free it up for other uses and other sports, but also to modernize and keep up with their facilities and where they want to be with their facilities.
And you think we're getting, a value for value exchange in this deal?
I suppose we wouldn't be here if we didn't think this was a good deal for the city. So we've worked a lot with the university to make sure we can get, again, all the impacts mitigated, but also maybe get some other things that benefit the community. I think the loss really, we've had this conversation many times at the council table, but parking drives everything. Every time we work on something, it seems like parking is the leading indicator. And this is the case here too. It's those 230 parking spaces, and really what we're giving up is a parking lot when you really look at the land on that side of the river. But it's a parking lot that serves the Science Center and Cuthbert and the park and the university. And so, but the 8 acres on the other side, we've had interest in that riverfront property for a long time. And so to get access to that and maybe potentially put it into our park system, connect it to the downtown park and the steam plant, and it becomes, I think, an attractive opportunity for us. So I don't think it's a bad deal from that perspective.
Okay, thank you, Alan, and then Matt.
Thank you, Mayor. So to me, this deal has a lot of public benefits, especially compared to the first time around that they brought this to us, the first offer. So comparatively speaking, it's a much, much better deal for the community and for the city. My considerations were parking. Well, first of all, was parkland. So we're getting twice as much parkland we had before. And part of the parkland was the parking lot. So now we're getting open space for it. And then there's parking and for all those events, that increases actually from 230 to over 300, plus all the parking around there is now going to be made accessible, which wasn't before. So it's a substantial increase in parking. The Science Center gets whole from their tailgating fees, better parking, pond enhancement, and for their science work and potential expansion. ADA was another concern. We got both sides of the canal. So ADA parking. It's a tremendous increase in the number of ADA. Plus, it's better. The $1 million community benefit project yet to be determined, but that's awesome. The emergency use of the building is great, and I think going to be hopefully never used. The bridge enhancement for safety and getting in and out with emergency vehicles is great. The canoe and kayak launch, I too have canoed it. The way I got in was by the canoe house, which was no longer there. So I don't even know how you get into the canal. So I think all that's great. And it's I'm very supportive of this deal. I have a question about the slide 6, which shows the lots that are on the south side of the river. There's like 2 lots that are south of the 2 more eastern lots that we would get, plus all the land to the east. That's all owned by the U of O?
I'm sorry, say all of that riverfront property, basically from what we call the MGP site, which we own, all the way upriver to generally you get to I-5 is all university owned property.
Okay. Right. And and what's their plan for all of that? That's in their CUP, but what's,
Yeah,
it's been controversial over the years, quite controversial about developing that, including the 200-foot
Yeah.
setback.
yeah, one of the things they did, because under the code, it's basically 100-foot setback. So for example, in the riverfront, it's 100-foot setback, but as working through their CUP process, they agreed to move that up into the 200-foot setback to keep that edge of the river open for years to come. There are some development areas designated. The little kind of notch in the city that, or the land that we would be getting from the university that is not included is actually could be built on by the university. I think in their CUP, they have a small building there, like 14,000 square foot maximum one day. I don't know if they'll overbuild on that or not, but there are some areas beyond the 200-foot setback that are buildable by the university, but not within that 200 feet.
Yeah. Having all that area that's north of railroad tracks actually being open space is my preferred solution, but I understand there's some options there. Any discussion about acquiring those two little pieces that are in that notch so that it makes it a contiguous piece?
I'll just say we tried.
Okay. Well, I think you guys did a great job in terms of getting a good deal for the city, and I very much appreciate the work that you guys have done, and I support the deal.
Hey, thank you, Matt, and then Jennifer.
Thanks. Can we go to slide 6, please, that Alan is alluding to, where that little notch, the proposed 8 acres, please?
I might point out that exhibit B is a bigger version of that, so it may be easier to talk about with that one.
So when this was first proposed to counselors individually in late 2021, there were 2 pieces that jump out to me as to why it was important. Parking was one, because we were making so many investments on the riverfront property, and the other was a third practice facility increases potentially recruitment possibilities for the University of Oregon Ducks. I want to focus on parking for a second. If indeed the little notch that Alan referenced are owned by the university, and we put in parking, we're essentially putting in parking for the university down the road.
Would you like me to respond to that? We were here at council a few months ago talking about the Riverfront Urban Renewal District. And we talked about the possibility of using Riverfront Urban Renewal to place parking somewhere. And council showed very little interest in using urban renewal for parking. And so we've kind of pulled back from the idea of putting parking there at this point. We had talked about it at one point when the university owned it. We talked about maybe leasing some of that property and putting parking along the railroad tracks to maybe help the park in the steam plant. But at this point, we don't have any plans to put parking there. I mean, it could be done in the future, but we don't have plans for that.
It's helpful to hear. I appreciate that. I do recognize the conversations with the Science Center. Denny, your words, they're anxious. They're looking to expand and hopeful that their parking needs are met. Where are representatives from the Science Center on this issue? Do they fully endorse this proposal?
I think I talked to them as early as last week, the end of the week, and I think my characterization is probably pretty good. They're anxious. And the reason is we haven't amended their lease yet, so they don't quite know what the possibilities are on the south side of their building, for example. And so I think, at least in concept, we have some thoughts about where they could expand in the future and where they can program outdoors and so forth. We haven't inked that yet with them, so they're anxious. Ideally, I think the parking configuration, which is like right at their front door, in their current building works better for them now because they're gonna have parking right in front of the building, right by the front door. But that's kind of where they envision expanding one day as well. So they have some uncertainty now about getting squeezed in by the university's plans that makes them a little bit anxious. I think when we get to the lease and negotiating a lease with them, we can address some of those. It's not going to be perfect for them. But I think we could address some of those. And again, a condition to closing is that we enter in a new lease agreement with the Science Center. We made that clear with the university that we need to get that figured out and buttoned up before we close on land swap, because that's important to us.
I appreciate those conversations with the Science Center. Have there been any similar conversations with the Willamette Natural Area? With the representatives of that particular community group?
Our parks folks might have had some conversation. I don't know, Matt, I'm looking at Matt, but I have not, but I know the university has reached out to them. They have walked the site with the university, and the university has walked through the plans. The university had a public open house event that I think some of the Willamette folks were present at, is my understanding. So there has been some engagement with our parks folks potentially and with the university, but I haven't been part of those.
Thank you. How common is it for there to be a negotiating point that indicates that an entity would contribute $1 million in a yet to be determined mutually beneficial community project? That seems a bit nebulous. And is it adjusted for inflation if that project doesn't come to fruition over the next decade?
What?
The imagination goes many places with a potential $1 million, quote unquote, mutually beneficial community project around Alton Baker Park. I would think that alleviating and tackling houselessness would be at the top of folks' to-do list. But I have a little bit of a heartburn over how nebulous that particular piece is.
How common it is, I don't know that. I'd have to think through that a little bit, but it was clear that we needed to go beyond just mitigating the impacts of the project and bring forth something or some things that are beneficial to the community. Councilor Zelenka pointed to some of the other things, but this is coming from the university. And the $1 million would be basically put into escrow at closing. So we did that to make sure that it's there and it's available, that whenever we have a project that it's there. And so yeah, we don't know exactly what the best use for that. And the reason is we really haven't master planned. We've always had a goal of master planning the Alton Baker Park property, and that's imminent. We're going to probably start working on that soon. And so putting the $1 million before the master plan didn't make sense to us. So the more prudent thing for us would put it in escrow to assure that it's there. And then when we have the project and we've done the master plan work, we can find a reasonable use for that. And I think the university has some interest in it being a partnership so that they see some benefits to their students and the university. And, you know, the university students use the park. And if there's something there that resonates with the university as well, that would be their preference, that it be a partnership project. That's something that we could both support.
Great. Thank you, Denny. My final point, slash question slash concern, remaining consistent with my observations and my heartburn that I expressed over the summer. When the university came to us, they talked about parking, they talked about recruitment. This third practice facility would bolster their ability to recruit. I find it hard to believe that a school that's already in a top recruiting class we would be benefiting them that much by adding a third practice center. I find it difficult to see that translates into a Rose Bowl game or a national championship. Like it's really a stretch for me. And so I recognize there are some valuable points here, but I'm dubious and I would like to be voting no.
Okay, Jennifer, then Emily, then Mike.
Thank you. So I have a lot of questions. I'll try to get through them in a way that makes sense to me. When this first came up, I was a little hesitant, I think, but I thought that our conversations around how we could find a way to make this a win-win for everyone seemed reasonable. It seemed like we have enough puzzle pieces that if we all come together, we can figure out a way for U of O to win, for the city government to win, for residents to win, for Easy and for the Eugene Science Center to win, for everyone to get something. And to be honest, when I look at this agreement, I think a lot of those people on that list do win. I think we get something out of it, although I think there might have been other ways we could get that parkland. I don't think we should pretend that this is the only way we can get those 8 acres. But I think that and speaking with the Science Center today, I don't think they're winning here. I think they're barely being made whole, which is a big concern. You know, we can talk numbers of parking, but it's not about numbers. It's about placement, right? So they're losing, it's not just losing a parking lot, right? We're losing park space, which has to be replaced. That parking lot has to go somewhere. So it's not as simple as we're just losing a parking lot. Don't worry about it. So they're going to have less access for their folks to come. I think it's an important community resource. I hope they'll be in a position someday to expand and be able to do really great things for our community. But if no one can get there, it discourages people from coming, right? And that's going to be a problem for them. I have concerns that this is not going to meet their needs. And I understand that in it is that part about how their lease has to get worked through. So my question is, what happens if we sit down and they're at some point are like, this is not meeting our needs? What are we going to do? Because I find it very hard to believe we're going to walk away from this. It seems a little disingenuous. So how far are we willing to go, I guess is my question.
That's a really good question, because I think we've asked ourselves that as well, because it's a condition of closing that we amend the lease. My sense is we would be back to council, having another discussion and saying, this is holding up the university's ability to close on the property and for us to do the land swap. And now what do we do?
Okay.
But I think, from the Science Center's perspective, it's probably very scary now, because it feels like the university is kind of just moving into their neighborhood, and they're going to kind of get pinched in. So I understand that, but I think there's some ways that we can negotiate a lease that provides them that space. The parking really, in my opinion, is better than they have now, because it's right in front of their building. And it might be a little less number wise, but it's a lot more convenient than what's there now. So in the short term, I think the parking probably should work pretty well. Maybe I'm missing something there, maybe because it's a smaller number or whatever, but it is definitely convenient. But I understand where they are about just questioning their ability to expand and program and all those kinds of things. But it feels like it's solvable. If we wouldn't be here if we didn't think we could solve it, but it's something we're gonna have to work through.
Yeah.
For sure.
And we can't close without a signed lease.
Yes.
I appreciate that. I hear a lot of, I think they can do this, and I think they can do that. And it makes me nervous because it's not our business to tell them how to do their business, right? I don't want us making a lot of assumptions about how this is a fantastic deal. Why don't you love it? That's what the U of O did to us, right? We don't want to turn around and do the same thing to someone else. That's not how we want to do business, I don't think. So my other question was, okay, about the $1 million. My understanding from reading this is that U of O has to agree to the project that we want to do. Is that a good read, or am I misunderstanding that?
That's what they have proposed, that they want this to be a partnership and feel like a partnership. So they would like us to be able to point to something, again, in the neighborhood of this project that they see some benefit for the university and some students as well. And could be fairly broad. You think about the improvements to the Canoe Canal and those kinds of things that the students would benefit from. That's where our thinking is going on this. And we've had those kinds of conversations with them. Right. And I think they see some benefit to those types of things, but that's the way it is structured.
Yeah, I think that's terrible. $1 million isn't going to go very far. I mean, just after our experience working on our parks plan, I can see that we're not going to get much for $1 million, and having to make sure it, also is benefiting the university when they're creating this entire situation to begin with makes me a little grumpy. I'm sure we might find something that they also like, but we might not. Our top priorities might not be their top priorities, and that's fine. But if they're trying to give us something that's gonna help, it's, oh, am I going over? I'm way over.
You're-
Someone should yell at
All
me.
right, I was letting you, I was letting you go because I kept thinking you were going to stop any minute.
Gonna stop?
Okay, I have Emily, then Mike, then Randy.
Good job, Jennifer.
I just.
Lots of questions, some things I hadn't really thought about. One thing I'd like to consider is, you know, who pays, who wins, who gets hurt. And this had seemed pretty much like a win-win, but I didn't know the details you brought up in the Science Center. And I can see how not having the lease makes it more worrisome. But I think we need to keep that, you know, our eyes on that and make sure that they aren't getting hurt there. One little question if U of O will enter into an agreement with the Science Center to ensure that the amount of the Science Center's annual game day parking revenue is not lost in future years. How many future years? You know, 2, 20, it makes a difference.
My recollection is that was for as long as they're there. If they move, that would no longer be.
Right, that makes sense, okay. One of the things I like about this is the university and the city are usually so separate, and it's difficult to engage for something that's mutually beneficial. Obviously this started with their desires, but I think that they've given us a lot of benefits that are pretty exciting. I like having that extra parkland. So that's cool. So yes, there's still some concerns, but I think we should go forward with it. I actually think it's pretty exciting. And, you know, some of the benefits, the parking, the emergency stuff, those are good. And yeah, $1 million, it doesn't seem like anything anymore, except in my budget. But I would like to see us work together. I don't see that as being a really bad part of it. And just as an aside, what's happening with the silent railroads? Aren't they over in that area?
Quiet zone?
The quiet zone, yes.
Still working on it.
It's been a quiet away.
Quiet for a while.
For the quiet.
They've been designed. The crossings have been designed. We just need to work with the railroad a little bit more.
Okay, well. Keep it going. Thank you very much.
$1 million for the dog park.
Okay, Mike, and then Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess first I want to say, while I'm happy to say I'm a proud graduate of the University of Oregon, I guess if I'd have looked more closely at the agenda, I might have chosen a different shirt to wear today. You know, look a little less like a cheerleader or something. I am,
Still isn't
however,
just the
in
president.
favor of this land swap based on many of the things that my colleagues have said. A couple of questions popped to mind though that help inform the discussion for me. Do you, Denny, know what the square footage is of the Science Center building? More or less,
I
roughly?
think it's about 11,000 to 12,000 square feet.
How much do we charge them for rent a year, a month, whatever?
Lease.
I think
They
Nothing.
own the building outright. We lease them land, and the lease references their ability to use our parking. So they lease land, and that's the lease that we're talking about. They don't lease the parking area, but they have rights to use certain, I think it's 75 spaces.
I was under the impression that the city owned that. I apologize. Thank you very much. In order to ask some other questions here, they're kind of hypothetical. I know those aren't always fun. I want to give respect to my friend Counselor Evans, who's asked on several occasions with different topics, this similar sort of question. I want to ask you to hypothesize what happens if if the University of Oregon becomes a member of a different conference than the Pac-12, or you know, if that their membership there changes. Can you talk about the impact of this, or university's plans that you're aware of, if that takes place? Or is this a part of that planning in some way, to your knowledge?
I'll answer it maybe a little bit different way.
Okay,
Those that pay attention to college football, the landscape has changed dramatically with the name, image, likeness, dollars that are going to players now. So, you know, with the change in coach, because last time we were here, we actually had a different coach. And with all of that NIL, all those changes, you know, we showed a design last time we were here that was really flashy and that's been their thing in the past. Is to Councilor Keating's point, is they've needed kind of those flashing facilities for recruiting. Today, that's maybe less important because they need to write checks to players. I mean, it's changed. Not the university, but the sponsors, donors, whoever's doing that. So they are, and I haven't shown a lot of pictures about the fancy O and all like we did last time, because they need to probably, and I think they are rethinking, do we need this splashy thing or do we need a more functional indoor facility that's modern and all of that? So we haven't focused too much on that giant O design, because I think this new landscape is causing them to rethink facilities versus other ways they use money and all that. So their intent is to still move forward with the indoor facility. It may look a little different than what we showed you before. And that's why, again, we didn't pay too much time with that image specifically, because I think that is a big change. They're trying to figure all that out right now because it's all new.
my understanding is if the Ducks become members of a different conference at some point, that may have requirements to them as to new amounts of students that the university would need to have. Does the number of students impact any of this at all that you're aware of?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Larger Autzen at some point, that sort of thing.
It's all about the success of the football team.
Okay.
I think, as far as how many seats you need.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Randy?
Thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're coming in loud and clear.
Excellent. I have my camera off just because I'm in a place that has questionable internet connectivity, and I want to make sure I don't get cut off. Thank you, Denny. Thank you, City Manager Maderi, and your staff, Denny, for negotiating and working through this deal. I think the attributes of this proposal have been well articulated by some of my colleagues. I recognize that there's a little consternation about moving in this direction for a number of reasons. I think one of the biggest ones is the Science Center, and I too am concerned about that, but I'm also confident we can work our way through this. We have a long-standing good partnership with the University of Oregon. They are important to our community. They are a big piece of our identity as a city. And I believe that we are getting good value for our community and our residents from this proposed deal. At the same time, I am concerned about some of the details of the deal. For example, I think it's fine. It's the U of O's facility if they build it, and they need to come up with a design that works for them. At the same time, I also want to be certain that we don't end up with a blimp hanger type design on one of our major entry points into our community. I can't imagine the U of O doing that. You know, they are very tasteful in the contemporary structures that they have built, especially around their sports and their branding. But at the same time, that's something I am concerned about. Denny, you and I talked a little bit about that, and you didn't think that would be a problem because we would still have approval authority. Could you speak to that a little bit, please?
Our approval authority really is around the design of the public amenities that they would be building, the parking, the street, et cetera, et cetera. There's not a final design review associated with the actual facility. But we have again made it clear that you know, they pitched this indoor facility and the need to expand and all that, and they need to stay within those sideboards if we're going to do the land exchange. So before we close, they're going to need to show that they're basically ready to move forward with the project that they pitched to us. So if they decide to do something else again, I think we would be back to this table deciding whether we still wanted to move forward based on a different project of some sort. So, the history tells me the university they have built world-class athletic facilities, and I'd be really surprised if that's not the mark they hit here. So.
Thank you. Sarah, did you have any comments on that as well?
Oh, I was asking a follow-up question about that design review. And I think part of what complicates it is that the property where the facility is actually going is actually their property now.
Mhm.
So where we really have our authority is around the rest of it that we're kind of in negotiations about. But I agree that we won't be closing on the property until they're ready to go, and we'll have a really good sense of what's going to be there. And if it's a blimp hanger, we might just have to have a blimp hanger clause.
Well, that was kind of a coarse way to describe it, but you understand what I'm saying. I want
totally
something
do.
that's suitable for the area and the facility, because aesthetics do matter. But I absolutely love the idea of us being able to add 8 acres to the riverfront development and that park area. And that just seems like a big win for our community. And but I do want to see how the details unfold on this, which, my understanding, if we pass this motion, that you will be given, city manager, the authority to negotiate the deal points. And I have complete confidence in you, but at the same time, I just want to make sure we're paying attention to things like the Science Center, how this all fits into our community, and then, start thinking about what are we going to do with the 8 acres. And I'm out of time, so thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And Jennifer, did you want to come back? One more comment?
I do. I'll try to be quick. So I appreciate Randy, Councilor Groves talking about the details. I agree that, getting in and getting those details correct is really going to make this the positive, proposal project that we really want it to be. So I have a few things just to keep in mind as we're moving forward and you guys are working on those details. One would be around mitigating the operational impacts to the Science Center. I think this is something that could really make or break that's being a positive experience. Are people going to be able to get in? They already have issues with sound from the current facility and their windows rattling because of music. That's going to get closer potentially. So if we do all this work and then no one wants to be in the building, that would be terrible. So, kind of keeping that in mind, and also just the construction and everything that's going to be happening, just ironing out those details so everyone knows what's happening, when it's happening, how we're taking. I mean, it's very vague if they're going to be, putting aside money to deal with this, who's taking care of this, how's it going to happen. So just making sure those are all buttoned down. And just a last thing, there was a part in the agreement about cooperative use of Autzon's parking, and it mentioned the Cuthbert and it mentioned the city being able to use the parking, but it did not mention the Science Center. So I don't know if that's something they considered, but it's a lot closer than some of the other lots that are going to be added. So if they're having a really large event, that might be something.
It should be included. So
okay, great. And that's awesome. And then somewhere in here, we used the Science Center's old name. So I will let you find that. That will be a Where's Waldo. And we can fix that. So I know I've been a little grumpy, but I want to say that our community has grown up with the U of O, right? The U of O has grown and we have grown right along with it. We've benefited from them being here and the staff and the faculty and the students they bring in and all their expertise and their passion, and they've benefited from us. So, I want to make sure it's really clear that while I know I've been a little picky on the details and maybe a little grumpy, I do think we can get to that win-win. I just think we need a little bit more work. I don't think it's quite there yet. It's a little too close to the last thing. Like you said, it's almost identical, and I think we can do a little better. So I'm going to be voting forward, even though I was very grumpy.
Okay, thank you. And Alan, one last question, and then I'm hoping we can.
Yeah, my question's really the community benefit project. I notice it says projects. So it could actually be multiple small projects. that could use that $1 million, right?
That's correct.
Like, you know, the students use the dog park and the dog park could get an enhancement, which I think it needs. So that part of it could go towards that. That'd be a real good one. Escrow account, which I assume would be an interest earning escrow account. So it would ratchet up over time until we figured it out. And I actually agree with Emily in that a joint project with the university is actually a good thing. Our relationship has been tested at times and testy at times, but it also actually means that that $1 million goes in there. But if we want to do something bigger, they're a partner. They could contribute more money to this deal as well, depending on what we decide to do. So it could be a bigger facility or more money than just the $1 million. And then finally, I do think that having the fence moved outside the Cuthbert to enhance it and have that be part of the deal is an important deal point here. I think that's a really good enhancement that would make this a much better deal, because and getting rid of that cyclone fence would be great too. But it would also enhance the Cuthbert experience dramatically because it's so cramped in there. Being able to put food carts in there and do some other things would make the Cuthbert such a much better facility than it is already, which is a great facility.
Okay, thank you. I think we're probably ready to put a motion on the table, but I just wanted to express my appreciation for the work that went into this, because this is definitely a very different deal than what we were first presented with when the U of O came up with this idea. So I'm really grateful to the effort that went into it. And I do agree with my colleagues that there are enormous public benefits to us, a lot of pieces that we're improving amenities, the Cuthbert, the access to the river, the 8 acres on the other side. I mean, there's so many pieces that are beneficial. And I appreciate Jennifer stepping up and keeping us very alert to the vulnerability that the Science Center is feeling, and our commitment that we want to make sure that they have the capacity to expand and do the programming that they very much want to do. So with that, I am going to turn to Councillor Groves to put a motion on the table.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the outline of terms included in attachment A and authorize the city manager to enter into an agreement with the U of O consistent with these terms.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 opposed, 1, and that passes. Thank you very, very much. Really appreciate the conversation. And with that, imagine we are actually ready to talk about strategic planning update.
Move adjourn.
There were some eye darts there.
Right.
Third time's a charm, Sarah.
Yeah, or is it the third or the fourth? Yeah.
Is it the?
And it's really just sort of a light touch. We'll be back again for more times. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I know we have half an hour. Super excited to be able to talk a little bit about the strategic plan and give you a little bit of a kind of where we're at after our time together. Whenever that was, it seems like it was a while ago now. I'm joined by our city manager's office division manager, Brooke Freed. And I'm going to sort of kick it off and talk high level. She'll talk about some of the goals. And then my hope is that future iterations of this, Brooke is just sort of like driving the strategic plan. So, you know, the whole idea of starting to, ever since I've been in this role, I've had this kind of overarching goal of getting us better alignment around we're out, talking to the community, understanding what their needs are, listening, and then we're doing some strategic planning with you around how to kind of line up behind that, and then the budget comes after that, and that we stay in kind of a nice rhythm of how we do that. Strategic, you know, we've been on a journey. So this is, I guess I'm in my 4th year. I don't even remember now. They all go together. So we've been doing a lot of that work, and this is sort of getting us going. And a lot of these things we've been working on, it's like this first iteration of it's a little bit of a challenge. You want to go to the next one? So just high level strategic planning. When I say that word to people almost immediately folks go to their idea of what a strategic plan is, and you'll have almost emotional reaction to whatever last strategic plan you had a part to. But really what we're talking about is really trying to understand, you know, why are we doing this work? What are we trying to accomplish? And then for us to come back with real action plans. And the idea was always that council works at this higher level focus goal, and staff are really coming back and saying, okay, here's how we're gonna meet your needs. This, I'm gonna talk a little bit later about the approach we took, but I would say there were some things that worked really well about this approach, and there's some things that didn't. And I think what we're hoping to come out of here with today is sort of an understanding of how we fix the things that didn't work as well, and really get a good product that you can all be proud of. Next one. So as we started this work, we really kind of tried to create a really solid foundation for you before we started talking about what those strategic goals would be. We did a community survey for the first time in a long time, over 10 years, of really trying to understand what was top of mind and important to the community. We had several work sessions around our financial health. We talked a lot about our workforce health and some of the issues we're facing internally within the organization, something we haven't done, I don't think, ever. So that was pretty exciting. And then we build on the council vision, values, and goals. And you did quite a bit of work on that. And I think the next slide might be that. You did quite a bit of work on that a year ago, and pretty much across the board, folks, normally when someone starts a strategic plan, they would start with this, like, let's vision, let's kind of do that work. But the feeling that I got from each of you is we just did that. Let's build on the work we've already done. We don't want to reinvent that. So I'm not going to read all the words, but this was you reworked your vision statement last year, really ramped up a lot of your work around equity and trying to really understand what it was you're hoping for this community. And then you went to your goals and outcomes, and you revisited this, and you kind of figured out which ones you want to keep moving forward and which ones you don't. And this is where kind of the strategic plan now starts to fall in. So as we got together, this is the process. All right, next slide. I know I'm going through this fast because we don't have that much time, but this was a really unique process and a little bit of a risk because we haven't done it this way before. But we had a consultant who's done some of these figured out how to do strategic planning faster. So you're not spending so much time in process, and you're actually getting to the actions and being able to help, especially around the urgent community needs. The process was pretty interesting. We had 25 staff from across the organization. I know most of you know this, but I know Lindsay doesn't know all this detail, and neither does the community. But the idea was, was this mix of council, exec team, and staff. And we had 25 people that applied. We had every department represented. We had union staff, we had management staff, and all of those folks came together to really work over 2 days around developing this plan. And I think that worked really well. It was pretty exciting. Most communities don't do that, don't include their line level staff at that level. And I really thought that was great. So the first thing we did was we worked together collaboratively. And for those of you that were here, we came up with this results-oriented statement. And this was really the why of what we're doing. Like, what's happening in the community right now? What have we learned? What is it we're trying to address? And what came out of that was this statement that really talked about, like, we're at a real inflection point. Things are very uncertain, and people really want to see some change. And so I'm not going to read through all the words, but this felt really good. So when I think about the good part, everybody in the room was pretty engaged in that conversation. I think we could all feel like, yep, here's where we are. The next thing we did was ask people, what could make Eugene better? And we put a lot of, table conversations. We put those things on the wall. And then we started to organize them into focus areas. Still, I feel like the focus area I feel really good about. And I will say, because of the way we had, so this starts to get into the things that are like, oh, didn't think that completely through. How does that work? But because of the mix of having staff with really different levels of experience and you with really different levels of experience, the focus areas really start to cross over between what is really council policy level work and what is really sort of operational type things. And it's a mix of both. And so one of the things that we're going to be focusing on in these next steps is how to sort of keep you at the goal oriented level and have us at the action level, and understanding that it's a little bit of a mix, and I appreciated it. I think you had an opportunity to really understand things that are happening in the organization that maybe you never have had access to. And we had staff that had access to you, and they never do. Not surprisingly, it's interesting, the focus areas, even though we didn't refer to the council vision and goals, they actually sort of line up against them pretty closely. And I'll say a couple of things more about them. So Brooke is going to kind of dive deeper into each one of these and some of the goals, but I'll say, I just want to talk about each one of them at a high level. The urgent community needs were the things that were really coming out of the survey and what we're hearing every day in emails and on the streets. You know, those were the, people really concerned about housing and homelessness, affordable housing, public safety. There was a number of those things. And so everyone said, you know what, one of the focus areas of this plan really needs to be that we need to be focused on how we address those. Communication and outreach, I think, especially with the lack of media and your desire to have more engagement with the community, really came across in multiple of those cards that were on the wall. This culture of belonging is where it starts to come both outside the organization, wanting to have a community where we have that belonging, and then also having an organization where we have that, where we have it at the, team level, division level, department level. So that sort of mixed into both. The how we do our work, there was a number of things, sorry, if you can go through it faster, but the how we do our work was really around, we have to start changing the ways we do things. How are we going to have a bigger impact? Maybe it could have to do with some reorganization. It could have to do with upgrading some of our systems, but it was really from a staff level in particular, this one was huge. And when we actually asked people to go to the area that they wanted, you almost noticed this like huge migration of those 25 city staff to the how we work, because everybody wants to see improvements. People, time, and money, this relates back to the workforce and financial discussions we had going into this, and really recognizing that there's some ways in which we need to stabilize our finances. We all know that. We need to stabilize our workforce. We've, a good example of that is that we've been going through pretty systematically doing market work with all of our employees and all our employee groups to get everybody sort of at a fair market, and learning, along the way how far we've been out. So those were kind of like the big picture. So then what didn't work as well is that we separated into goals and started talking about goals, and you didn't have an opportunity, the council didn't have an opportunity to migrate between those different tables. So you didn't get to weigh in on the urgent community goals, and you didn't get to weigh in on culture of belonging goals. And there were a couple of areas that I think were just flat out missed when I started to look back at what was there. So Brooke will walk through that a little bit more, and then we'll come back to how we plan to fix that.
So before I go into each of the areas, overall, we're looking for your direction to confirm that we've identified the appropriate focus areas, and then that will allow us to be able to go and take a deeper dive in refining the goals that I'll present. Overall, the focus areas and goals will define what we're striving for and how we'll measure it. So the focus area, urgent community needs, means that we will prioritize crises that are or may degenerate into problems impacting health, safety, and welfare. And during that workshop, some of the initial goals that were identified include reducing the number of unsheltered, unhoused residents, increasing public perception of personal safety, and increasing housing affordability. So as a reminder, our goals are meant to articulate what we're striving for, not how we'll do it. And the how will come through our action planning process. You'll also note here that we indicate which existing council goal the focus area supports, and you'll see that throughout the next several slides. So a focus on communication and outreach means that we'll be a city that informs, listens, and understands what the community wants and needs, and a community that understands, participates, and has confidence in what the city is doing. Some of the initial goals that were identified include better informing the community and increasing awareness, connecting with and listening to a broader cross-section of the community, and increasing confidence in council and staff. The focus on a culture of belonging means that we are cultivating a community where everyone feels included, respected, and valued. and that we are united in uplifting the diversity of identities and experiences in order to provide equitable access to resources and opportunity. Some initial goals identified include increasing a sense of belonging in our workplace, increasing diverse representation of supervisory staff in the city organization, increasing representation from communities of opportunity in city-led groups such as boards and commissions, and increasing service and program use and participation by communities of opportunity. And I'll note that communities of opportunity refers to those from historically marginalized or underrepresented groups. Focusing on how we do our work means that we can be most effective when there are clearly defined priorities and outcomes, flexibility for staff talent, and room for innovation, and where we can measure progress and shift when needed. Some initial goals include establishing clearly defined city priorities with identified outcomes that take into account staff, council, and resource capacity, aligning our organizational processes with those priorities to improve the results of our work, and increasing the number of engaged employees in our organization. And our fifth and final focus area, people, time, and money, means establishing a sustainable foundation for council support and to ensure employee retention and development in order to create the capacity to accomplish these strategic goals. Some initial goals include increased staff capacity for innovation, strategic thinking, and collaboration, lowering employee vacancy rates, and increasing employee engagement and retention. So you'll notice that the focus areas are mutually supportive of each other. For example, making progress in this focus area would also help us to better address our urgent community needs.
So as you can see from just the goals that were mentioned, there's places where your previous goals are missed. There's some things missing. So for example, the last time we went through your goals, there was a real clear desire to have more focus on economic development. And that conversation we didn't get deep enough into it. So as we start to go through and match these up and refine it, you can expect to see some of those coming back as recommendations for you. So yeah, we're looking for feedback on the focus areas. Once those are refined and we come back with goals, as I think the consultant talked about them being specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely, inclusive, and equitable. He called them SMARTY goals instead of SMART goals, which a lot of people do. And then, our job is really to come back with an action plan and the resources to do that. So I don't know if there's anything else if we want to just jump in there. So the plan is you'll say, yeah, these are the right focus areas and like the direction you're going. And then we'll be back again a couple of times and hopefully we'll get into a rhythm where this is easier.
Okay, thank you. Are there comments? Okay, I have Emily and then Alan to start us off. And Greg.
Thank you for this. I don't really feel like we're any farther along than we were in September because we wrote these things in September and they're the same. We've seen them a bunch of times and they're not changing. So the review refine report is really more interesting. I'm fine with the focus areas, but I've been fine with them for 5 months now. So I'm more interested in what are we going to do? Well, urgent needs, housing, homeless, and economic development, fine, but we're talking at such a high level that it almost feels like a waste of time. We already know these things that we want to do. Let's get on with how we're going to do them. What exactly are they? Instead of this large, huge picture. We're people. We need to get in there and do things. So I'm hoping that there's more to it than this, because this doesn't feel like good value for what we spent time and money. So yeah, show me more.
Yeah. Thanks. I think the whole intent was that we would come out of that September work session and be able to be back in front of you a lot sooner to just make sure we're on the right track. You like this. We needed to address the fact that different counselors had different discussions about goals. So you weren't going to be all in alignment until we had an opportunity to get back. And it's just taken, as you know, we've bumped it a handful of times. So I totally agree.
Okay, Alan and then Greg.
I think Sarah and Brooke
So this is our June 2021 vision, values, goals, and outcomes. And the goals and outcomes are those high level things that we said, but underneath each one of them, there are specifics, you know, like under sustainable and accountable development, encourage sustained downtown transit corridors, riverfront, refresh and sustain our triple bottom line. There is a pretty specific. So I like this. I think this was good work that we came up with this. And it tended to funnel things for me down to enough specificity that it had meaning. Then I get to this, and we have these focus areas, and maybe you can help connect the dots for me. So I'm not sure how the focus areas relate to the goals and outcomes. That's question one. And the second question is, of the focus areas, they're not as specific, so I don't know how that relates. And then finally, one of the focus areas, and I thought they're all important, but one of my particular favorite ones was the sustainable and accountable development. I don't see that in here at all. And so I'm wondering, what does that not get a focus area? Is it, you know, if the club or off the island, or?
Yeah.
So maybe you can help me with.
Yeah, I think that part of it is, you know, I think part of what we're looking at is how you map those two things onto each other. So we're not doing the other goals. I think it was more of a, given everything that's happening right now, what do we want to focus on first? And that's why, you know, it would have been better if we were here sooner, because you would have been like, yep, that we agree, that's it. So the plan is that we will take the plan is that this is really kind of like knowing these are your vision, values, and goals. This is our plan for what we're going to address first that's urgent, and how we're going to measure it and report back to you. And I would expect that under those urgent community needs, there'll be, we still just have to work through some of that and how it maps on. But this isn't saying that as we move forward, we're not going to worry about those things, because those are really high level goals and outcomes we're all trying to achieve. I don't know if you have a better articulate way to say that than me.
I would just say that the vision, values, and goals remain foundational to the strategic plan itself. And so given the moment that we're in, you know, it was important to us to look at what the community had to say. So through the community survey, the financial condition and workforce condition, and that will helps us to think about how to prioritize the work that we need to do right within this period of time. So that doesn't mean that the vision, values, and goals will not continue to shape the work that we do. So when we think about the next steps of the work, we would be working to refine the goals, but also to identify the specific metrics associated with those, so that we can ensure we actually are making progress on the vision, values, and goals that you've outlined for us. So those don't currently contain specific measures, and that's what the strategic planning work will help us to do. So if we don't see actions that achieve that work, we need to make sure we identify those so that we can have the resources behind those.
It still seems like two orbits that aren't connecting to me. And these goals and outcomes are quite specific. Increased response to and decreased incidence of hate and bias crimes. That's a very specific goal to me.
Mm-hmm.
And these seem super high level, and I guess there's more work that's going into this. So, and I guess I don't see how they connect. I think they're almost like two orbits that are going on, and I'm missing what the Venn diagram looks like, where they overlap. And speaking of that, the other part of what I don't get is our 4 primary things that we learned from the survey that people are the most concerned about, and which are action items for the council: housing, homelessness, public safety, and climate change. And I don't know how that fits in here either.
Yeah. So I mean,
that's a third orbit going over here. That's not.
No. That orbit is contained within. I think what will happen is, unless there's something you don't like about the focus areas, the next one you'll see those orbits come together, because urgent community needs will overlap with what you see in safe community, what you see in sustainable development, what you see in the fiscal stewardship. I mean, there's going to be places where those actions show up again. It's meant. So I understand what you're saying, because I've been trying to figure this out too. Like, how do you take the work we've already done and actually get more strategic about it? If we have limited resources and limited time, where do we go and where do we start first, and what's really front of mind? And what happened is, I think we had just gotten the results of the community survey. And so everybody was that was very front of mind. And some of the things that are also really urgent or important were not brought up. And that was brought up that day as well as right now.
I had that same criticism.
Yeah.
And that was part of the functionality of how it's done. But I think these are really good, and I don't want to lose them. I don't want to see these goals and outcomes be replaced with these focus areas.
Yes,
I hope that's not the intent.
No, not the intent.
I guess I'll wait to see how they connect and how and enhance each other.
Okay, Greg, and then Jennifer.
Yeah. Go back to the slide here that talks about the culture of belonging. One of the issues that I've faced over the 10 years that I've been on council, actually before I came on council, is the issue of the unevenness in terms of people feeling that they belong in the city, that they belong, they're a part of the city. The operational, definition that I work with in terms of a culture of belonging is one that is built on access, reciprocity, and a sharing of power and opportunity. And there are sections of our community that do not feel that they are empowered, that they don't feel that they have the opportunity that other parts of the community have in terms of sharing and creating that culture of belonging. And so you have sections of town, mine to be, I'll just put it out there, Bethel does not feel that, and has not felt that they've been a part of Eugene ever since they felt that they got swindled in the annexation vote in the 60s. They thought they were flim-flammed on that one. And there's a lot of the old timers that still do feel that way. Even the people that are newer in my area, there's other areas of the city that kind of feel this way too, that there's an unevenness in terms of access to power, access to the city. And, there has to be not just that access piece, but there needs to be the feeling that they're getting something back. And that's something that has resonated with me in my time on council and before when I was on the LTD board of directors, is that there are still sections of Eugene that don't feel that they are a part of Eugene. And so the way that I looked at this culture of belonging was it was more focused internally around staff issues and not extending outwardly to the community at large. And if you could speak to that, I would, appreciate that.
Yeah. So again, why we felt like we needed to come back and revisit this before we kept going down the road we were going with the goals that were identified at those tables is that happened. There were places, depending on who went to which section, where it was either maybe staff heavy, or the staff that were there were really passionate about something, but may not have been the resource experts in our organization that would say, oh yeah, this. So our intent would be to balance that as we're going in and saying, okay, given what we know about the vision and values, and given what we know about, these areas, here's the recommended, first sort of set of actions. And that's where I think that evens out. I was surprised that I think if we'd had more time, that conversation would have been more balanced between the community and the organization. I can tell you that, I mean, even this week, I've been in a meeting with community members talking about how important that culture of belonging is for them in the community. So I do think getting the right people there to talk about, here's the goal that would actually, and how you would measure that, as opposed to someone who really cares about it, but isn't doing that work every day.
Okay, Jennifer and then Mike.
Thank you. So I always assumed that 1 weekend wasn't gonna, like, we're not gonna bust this out in a weekend, right? That clearly we're gonna have to revisit this. I mean, I think actually taking a little bit of a break and then coming back to it is a really smart move, because you have to really percolate on these things. I know strategic planning can be really frustrating for people who like to be at the action level. I personally love strategic planning because if I don't have that what and why, it makes it impossible, I think, to really do good work, right? So I think we want to take this slow and get it right. I think Alan made some really good points, though. I feel like our goals and outcomes has been trying to kind of work as a mini strategic plan. You know, that's how it kind of feels to me, because we didn't have this, and that I would like it to be more of like how an organization uses its core values. That's kind of where we hold our core values. The strategic plan is where we get into that, right? How do we translate those core values into this period of time's actions, right? We're going to do the next 5 years or the next 3 years, rather than trying to shove those into the goals and outcomes. That makes a lot more sense to me, but obviously I'm just one person. So do we like the focus areas? The last two are a little, I mean, assuming we want the public to be able to read these and get it, not just us. Like, I get it because I was there. The last two, I think, are a little confusing in that they kind of sound like they could be the same thing, right? How we do our work is people, time, and money, right? So I don't have a suggestion, I'm sorry. But I feel like maybe that last one, I remember when you were explaining it to us early in this conversation, whatever you said, I was like, oh yeah, that's what it is. I didn't write that down, so maybe you can remember what you said.
If you can't remember it, it's
I know,
probably
it's
not
terrible.
strategic.
Something about the stability and
Right.
something. But anyways, if it were me, I would maybe workshop that last one, just so it's a little more straightforward about what we're trying to talk, so someone gets it right away. What else can I be helpful on? I think this is a really great start. I do think that it would have been great to have an extra day so we could have swapped around, but I trust my colleagues. I think we all came and I know the staff that I worked with did their very best, and we knew we were missing things in the conversation. We acknowledged it. We're like, we're not there yet, but this isn't the last stop, right? There's still time to go. So I think we're headed in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. When we did this work on that weekend at the community center there were 3 of those initial category areas, 3 groups. There was a group I was with, and I don't even remember which one it was, but spent most of my time talking there. The one immediately to the corner of us, to the right of us, was towards the back, and the the facilitator was sitting at that table, and that one ended up being communication, and I forgot the other was called. But there was one that I was more passionate about than the others, and I didn't get to spend any time in the latter part because we were told we could move around and talk and be involved in some of those. I argued really heavy up front at the very beginning for the phrase culture of belonging, because that's really important to me. But what ended up coming out of it was not at all what I intended. What the group that worked at that table did just wasn't at all what I had in mind in that thinking in that phrase. And I have some real challenges with what that group came out with. I'm more in line with what Greg was saying, I just think that needs more refinement. Like he said, there are parts of our community that don't feel like they belong for a host of reasons. The injustice of how parts of West Eugene and parts of Santa Clara and River Road have been treated over time by the city as an organization culturally, the way parts of our community interact with other parts of our community. Try being a Republican. I mean, I'm just saying, you know, there are ways we treat one another in this community that many of us feel, and plenty of times, that we don't belong. And I think that's a goal worthy of us working harder to understand, to define, and to do things about that create better sense of belonging amongst everybody. So I hope we put more energy in that.
Okay, thank you. I know Jennifer has one more comment and then I want to make a comment, but I'll let you go for a second. Oh, you have, and Greg. So our 2 second rounds, Jennifer and Greg, and then we'll try to wrap it up. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I think Mike actually makes a good point. And we had like, I think it was like 3 papers of goals. I was in this group of goals. Clearly you did not read all of them, right? I can't remember if there was one about that. I know that I brought up that folks in North Eugene don't always feel connected to the city. Whether that became a goal or not, I honestly can't remember. I will say that, like I said earlier, I think strategic plans do not cover forever. They cover your priorities in the moment. So if you have to make choices, and this is going to be those things we're going to have to hash out. We have limited resources and limited capabilities. And if I'm trying to allocate resources in my choices to focus on communities that have been historically excluded, and who are literally told on the streets to go back to where they came from, or someone from North Eugene who just feels like they're ignored a little, don't always have a voice. Those are very different circumstances. I'm going to go with the first one. But those are the things we're going to have to work out. And I think there's time built into this process to make those decisions and to look at our resources and say, okay, here are our priorities. How are we going to make sure that we do as much as we can, but also at the same time acknowledging we are not going to be able to do everything. We're going to have to make choices.
Okay, and Greg.
Yeah, there's a book that I've been reading on belonging that I would strongly suggest that staff pick up, and that's Cultures of Belonging, building inclusive organizations that last. It was published last year in 2022 by Alita Miranda Wolf. It's very clear. It's not that long of a book, but it talks about, and really defines what a culture of belonging in an organization is and what it should look like. And I think it's incredibly important that if we are going to walk our talk, that we do the kinds of things that, people are saying that they're not getting in terms of their relationship with the city. And that is that, as one of my neighbors put it, is you're more than happy to take my money, but you're not happy to give me value in return.
Okay. Thank you all. I just wanted to chime in on one other piece here, which is the urgent community needs, the first one, which, I think the list that is currently included is a little bit short, and I think we're all recognizing that it's missing economic development and climate change in that list. So that feels important to me. I have a little bit of a struggle with the tone of the definition. And because I actually think in a strategic plan, we want to be talking about what we're fixing in order to be the community we wish to be, not talking about the community that might degenerate. So that just, I would just like to, I know that was the mood of the day because we had just gotten the community survey and people were feeling sort of the burden of that. But I think as we move forward in a strategic plan, we really want to be looking at where we're going and not just speaking of the threats. And with that, I think it's clear enough. Thank you very much for your perseverance bringing this back. And I think with that, we're adjourned until 7:30.